Hello guys and welcome back. As promised, it is finally time to start making dioramas for my already finished tanks. For my first one, I would like to build a 2-story farm building made from XPS Foam. First, I need to create the general shape of the house. I didn't do it quite as well as I would have liked and would definitely do it different next time. I made the house hollow by gluing both sides of the corner together and reinforcing it with some extra styrofoam. It would have been much easier and more stable to use full XPS blocks, but I only had these thinner boards at the time. The roof is made from a piece of cardboard that has been cut to size. After some fiddling around to find the right angles, I now have a nice base to start working on. I started by drawing a simple sketch of the building to get a rough idea of how it will look later. With this sketch, I can now use a scalpel to cut out the windows and door frame. Here you can see some disadvantages of making it hollow, because the front can bend quite easily and I have to be careful not to break it. The easiest way to cut XPS foam is with a new blade and multiple soft cuts. If you apply too much pressure, you risk tearing the foam apart instead of actually cutting it. The ground floor gets 3 windows and the door frame. For the foundation of the house, I chose a series of larger slabs of natural stone. To distinguish them from the rest of the house, I glue a thin strip of foam around the bottom of the house. PVA glue works really well for gluing all kinds of materials like XPS foam, wood or cardboard. I also really like the look of larger cornerstones on brick houses. This is done in the same way by gluing thin sheets of foam around the corner. But I had to score the edge of each stone with a knife, otherwise they wouldn't have turned around the corner. I will have to close that gap later. And now comes the fun part of carving the individual bricks into the foam. To make it a bit easier, I drew a simple guide with the correct measurements on a piece of paper. The bricks will be approximately 3 mm times 8 mm. This is a little bigger than they should be, but they will get a little bit smaller throughout the process. I begin with the horizontal cuts every 3 mm. I do this on both sides of the door frame. These 2 rows now serve as a guide for the horizontal cuts. By aligning a metal ruler, I can continue to cut the entire length and should have the right distance between them if I am careful to stay parallel. Looks good, and small imperfections are nothing to worry about, as they will be leveled out later, and they were slight differences in sizes, especially with older bricks. Now I can make the cuts for the individual bricks every 8 mm. Once the individual bricks are cut, I need to increase the gap between them. You can use a wide variety of tools such as toothpicks, pencils or sculpting tools. For the horizontal lines, I used this thick blunt blade. And since I carved everything into fairly thin sheets of foam, I have to be careful not to accidentally cut too deep. I do the fine work with a pencil. This makes it much easier, especially for the narrower side. At the same time, I can round off all the corners a little, which just makes the whole thing look a little nicer and more uniform. The whole concept is quite simple, but it takes some time. especially for a large building like this. Looking back at it, it might have been wiser to start with a smaller building, but it is too late for that now. And here we have the ground floor finished. For my first attempt, I would say it looks okay, but there is room for improvement in some areas, of course. To separate the upper and lower floor, I add another concrete slab in the form of a foam strip. And then the steps are repeated. Make 2 rows of guides on both sides of the wall, then take a long ruler and draw the horizontal lines along the entire length. Cut each stone and then increase the gap between them. Then you should end up with something like this. As you may have noticed, there are no windows in this part yet, but we will get to that now. Since the entire front is already quite thin, I don't want to increase the risk of failure even further by cutting holes into my wall. Instead, I simply remove the bricks where the windows will be and leave the back of the foam board intact to increase structural integrity. I can simply tear off the bricks with tweezers. Now I want to add additional stone texture to my bricks. The easiest way to do this is to press a ball of crumpled aluminium foil over the surface. With the basic brickwork finished, I can start to work on the details. First are the door and window lintels. These are made from coffee stir sticks cut into the right shape and length. I want them to sit on half a brick on each side, so I have to cut one of the bricks in half to fit it. Then I remove the bricks that are in the way of the window lintel. A thick layer of PVA glue not only ensures a strong bond, but also helps to smooth out the rough surface underneath. The window frames are made similarly. Just not with coffee stir sticks, but with matches for crafting. In my opinion, the shape is a little better, but which wood you use is of course your decision. I cut it a little longer than the windows, so that I can press it in and the pressure will make the whole thing more stable. Of course, I still use PVA glue on the contact points. I use coffee sticks again for the door frame because they are a little narrower and are better suited for this length. I will continue the woodworking and start working on the gable. Here I will build a fairly simple gable out of wooden boards. The wooden sticks are all cut to the appropriate length and angle and then glued in place with PVA glue. Any excess glue is removed with tap water before it has time to dry. This design is quite common on older farm buildings or barns, as the attic was often not insulated and simple wooden cladding was sufficient. Unfortunately, I didn't get the top edge very well, but I can simply glue on a straight edge with additional stirring sticks. Next is the roof. Since my options for roof tiles were quite limited, I opted for flat rectangular ones. These are cut from thin strips of XPS foam with a width of about 5 mm and a length of 8 mm. There are some really fancy cutting tools, like the chopper, out there if you have the money, but I don't have any of those, so I had to use a piece of paper and a knife. Not as nice as a dedicated cutter, but it does the work. And now I have to glue each roof tile onto the cardboard roof. This took a really long time for the entire roof. But since you are watching a video, I can show you multiple hours just like this. And this was just part of the roof, but I'm sure you get the idea of how to do the roof by now. A plain roof would be kind of boring in my opinion, that's why I want to add a chimney. I used another piece of XPS foam for that. It will also be made out of bricks, so I will give it the same treatment I gave the walls. And once the chimney is done, I can glue it in place. Now let's get back to the roof. Here I have to cut a few roof tiles in half to make them fit properly. This is the finished roof. Took quite a while. Once the glue had enough time to harden, I can use a sharp knife to cut the roof tiles flush with the top edge. Remember the gap in the cornerstones from the beginning? Time to use some putty to cover it and add some stone texture. Just be careful that you use water-based putty that doesn't dissolve your foam. You should always try out glues, paints and putties on a spare piece of foam just to be safe. And now I can use some diluted PVA glue to add a protective coat over the entire building. Depending on what paints you use, this isn't 100% necessary, but just to be safe, I will still add this step. I spent so much time on this already, it would have been a disaster if for some reason the following steps suddenly dissolved my house. And I think I will make a cut here before I start painting and split this in 2 parts. So far I am quite satisfied with how it turned out. The next part will be all about painting and weathering this house, so stay tuned. If you enjoyed it this far, please leave a like and subscribe to not miss any future videos. Thank you all for watching and see you next time.